Hi everyone, and welcome to our everyday Wholefoods webinar. I'm naturopath Shani Salter from the Integrated Wellness Clinic. The Integrated Wellness Clinic, a lot of you may know, essentially we have 9 clinic locations all across Queensland and New South Wales, which is fantastic. We offer a simple 3-step methodology to really ensure that we do get you to your place of optimal health and well-being. And so far we have helped thousands of people to reach their level of optimal health and well-being, which is pretty special. Who I am, as I mentioned, Shani Salter. I work a lot in digestive health. So a lot of the patients that we do see here at the clinic are experiencing some kind of digestive imbalance, whether that be bloating, nausea, reflux, IBS type symptoms, and it goes on. Mental health, which we also see a lot of, so looking at things like anxiety and depression. Even sleep disturbances fit in here as well. Also, a lot to do with skin and hormones. That's another common thing that we do see a lot in our patients here, and children. So I do work a lot with children in a health setting as well. What we're going to cover today is essentially everything to do with whole foods. So what does it actually mean to eat a whole food? Nutrition 101, so really simplifying whole foods as well and breaking it down to a basic level. So what's a fat, what's a protein, and what is a carbohydrate? We'll also be having a bit of a chat about what a superfood is and some examples of some great superfoods, how food can affect your mood, what superfoods we have that you may be eating every day and can easily incorporate into your diet every day, as well as looking at foods to support and heal the gut and gut health, and things that will also help to support detoxification pathways in our body as well. So firstly, let's have a look at what a whole food actually is. Now, to make this really simple, the term whole food essentially means to eat a whole food in its whole and original form. So the best example I love to use when we're talking about whole foods is considering what your great-great-grandparents used to eat. So if you think about them walking into a modern day supermarket, what would be the first thing that runs through their head? They'd probably be like, oh my goodness, what is all of this stuff? So on the outskirts, we've got the fruits and the veggies, all of our amazing produce. We've got some of our baked goods. We've got the frozen foods as well, the milks, all that kind of stuff. So these are all foods that they would most likely recognize. Whereas when you consider all of the aisles in a supermarket, that would mostly be new to them. They would recognize some of the stuff, so maybe, you know, some of the jarred and preserved foods, as well as some of the grains and the really basic stuff, but all of the other stuff in the middle, they're not going to recognize. And this is the best way to consider if something is a whole food or not. So a whole food is something that is unprocessed. It's getting back to basics. It's eating food in its entirety, as I was mentioning before, and a good example of this is considering something like a smoothie to a juice. And juices can be absolutely fantastic, especially when they are pumped full of greens and amazing fresh organic produce. However, when you consider kind of the modern day juice of what most of our kids are drinking at brekkie, and perhaps we are as well, this is not exactly a whole food. What they've done is they've gotten, let's say, an orange, for example, and they've popped it through a juicer. The heat from that juicer, if it's not a cold pressed one, has already potentially damaged some of the nutrients like the vitamin C in that orange. And it's also separating the liquid from the fibrous material. So what comes out is we've got two sides, the juice coming out one side and the fiber coming out the other. So this is essentially not a whole food anymore. We are getting a concentrated form of the sugars and the liquid and hopefully some of the nutrients, but a lot of it can be lost from the damage from the heat, as well as from separating the fibrous component from the liquid component. And it's not a whole food. When you consider this to something like, or compare this, sorry, to something like a smoothie, we are eating a whole food, because what you'd be doing in comparison is peeling the orange and then throwing the whole orange, seeds and all, into a blender, blending it up. So this is where we're going to differentiate whole foods once again. Same thing if we're considering something like breakfast cereals, which are unfortunately called whole foods. However, how many of those cereals did you see actually growing on a farm or in a paddock as they currently are? This doesn't happen. So they have been heavily processed and usually full of things like sugar and salt and additives, and are no longer a whole food. Whole foods, we also want to really be focusing more on the nutrients that are in that food, so that both the macro and the micronutrients, which we'll get into shortly, rather than the calories that are in that food. So it's far more important to actually consider what is in your food rather than just the amount, so to speak. And a great example of this is that even foods that are cooked really well, that are, so take for example a nice stew, you do actually yield more calories from this than you would something like those same vegetables in a fresh salad. When we're looking at what foods fit into a whole food category, this is where we're looking at vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. So similar to what I was talking about with what your grandparents would recognize in a supermarket. Okay, Nutrition 101. Now, when we break our foods down, or whole foods, we can break them into two categories. We can break them into what are called our macronutrients, which is our fats, our proteins, and our carbohydrates. And we can then further break them down into what are called micronutrients. So micro meaning very small. Micronutrients is where we're specifically looking at the vitamins and the minerals. Before we get into that, it's really important to understand that the macronutrient perspective of a food is extremely important. So to make this really simple, let's talk about each of those three categories. First, we've got our fats. So we've demonized fats for a couple of decades now, and we're finally coming to the other end of this fat phobia generation, which is amazing because fat is so important for every system in your body. If we do not have the right amount of healthy fats in our body, we can't do things. We can't do things like produce hormones. We can't support our nervous system. So every single nerve in the body conducts an electrical signal to be able to talk to your brain, and for your brain to talk to your muscles, and so on and so forth. And this is actually done via what's called a myelin sheath, which is a fatty coating around all of these nerves. So if we don't have the correct level of fat, our nervous system cannot even function properly on a basic level. Fat is also important for satiety, so to allow us to feel full. And this is where we're getting all of our fat-soluble vitamins, so looking more specifically at those micronutrients like vitamin A, D, E, and K. Now, this is where it gets tricky because fat does contain double the energy or calories of protein or carbohydrates, but we also have to look at how that fat is actually working in our body. So as I mentioned, fat is so important for satiety, so allowing us to feel full. And if we don't have enough of it, we are likely to actually eat more carbohydrates and starches and potentially more protein, but more likely to be the carbs, which is not going to benefit our health immensely in any way. So when we're looking at good sources of fat, we're looking at things like really good quality oils, so extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil, good quality nuts and seeds, avocados. You can also put your good quality fatty fishes in here as well. Now, protein is the next macronutrient we're going to talk about. And just as a rough guide, we do need quite a lot of protein. So I haven't really seen a lot of patients who are vegetarian or vegan, and there is a massive vegetarian and vegan movement at the moment in the world, which is fantastic, but we need to make sure that we're eating enough protein and that we're doing protein properly. So when it comes to protein, we need to be having roughly 1 gram of protein per kilo of your body weight per day. And this is just really rough. It varies person to person. Everyone's an individual. So we need to take that into account as well. But what this looks like for you is that if you weigh roughly 60 kilos, you need around 60 grams of protein per day to be able to sustain everything in your body. Now, the way protein works is that it is actually broken down into what are called amino acids. There's 9 essential amino acids that we must get through protein to then go on and be the building blocks for everything within our body. So from building our hair and our nails to hormones and neurotransmitters and DNA, if we do not have adequate levels of protein in our body, once again, our body cannot do these jobs properly. So essentially, protein is important for the structure and the foundations of everything in the body. And if we don't have the right amount, it's like trying to build a house without having a solid foundation and perhaps without having better blocks in place or the right framework. It's just not going to be a solid structure. Protein, as we talked about, is important for neurotransmitter production and hormones, as well as DNA, the immune system to be able to function properly, and to stabilize blood sugar levels. And this is obviously really important if you are perhaps diabetic, but it is important to understand this regardless, because we must have protein to sustain that satiety as well, so to allow us to feel full and to ensure, once again, that we're not going to be craving all of those starches and the sugars, which is typically our carbohydrate type foods. So protein, the foods we're looking at in this group is our meat, our dairy, our legumes, our nuts, grains, and seeds. Then we've got carbohydrates, which is the final macronutrient group. And carbohydrates are a really quick source of energy. So how much of the time are you actually starving? Say it's that 3 o'clock, you've been in the office all day and you've been working really hard and you realize how hungry you are. You're ravenous. The last thing you feel like doing is having a piece of salmon with some eggs and some spinach and a really fat and protein dense meal. It's usually the last thing we feel like. What we want is we want to reach for a sandwich, the cookies, some chocolate, all of those kind of foods which are really high in carbohydrates, starches, and sugars. The reason this happens is because they are such a quick source of energy. So they're absorbed and utilized by the body much faster as a source of energy than a fat or a protein is. The problem with this is that as soon as we have a spike in our blood sugar levels from having our starchy or sugary foods, we drop down equally as fast. So then we're craving those carbohydrate, starchy, sugary foods again. And this is what we refer to as the blood sugar roller coaster in clinic. Now, when we're eating carbohydrates, they should be coming from mostly complex sources. So we've got our simple carbohydrates and then we've got our complex carbohydrates. And your complex ones are more your whole food type carbohydrate sources. So this is where we're going to be looking at really good quality vegetables. Specifically things like that are, green are always great when we're looking at carbohydrates. So things like broccoli, all of your kale, potentially your cabbage, your green leafy veggies are really fantastic here as well. We can still do our starchier type carbohydrates here, like our sweet potatoes and our potatoes, but it just, once again, it needs to be in moderation. So we shouldn't just be having white potato with a tiny amount of steak. That is just simply not adequate as a whole food type source. So carbohydrates is where we will get a lot of those micronutrients that we talked about as well. So specifically looking at our vitamins and our minerals here, and is also where we're going to get a decent source of fiber. So let's go back to that analogy of where we're looking at the fruit juice and we're juicing the orange. Out one side, we've got the liquid, the other side, we've got the pulp, and the pulp is fiber. So fiber is so important for digestive health, as well as assisting in detoxification, which then goes on to support things like your gut health, and hormone production and clearance and all that kind of stuff too. So you can start to see how tricky it actually becomes to ensure that we are eating not only the right types, but the right amounts of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. Now, if we have a bit of a closer look at fats, they're not all equal. So we know that, fried foods are nowhere near as good as things like avocados and nuts and seeds. So we're going to kind of go into depth a little bit more into the different types of fat and what we should be eating. So firstly, we have saturated fats. Now, this is probably something that you hear a lot about. This is where we're talking about things like the animal fats. So when you're eating steak or anything like that, this is where we're talking more specifically saturated fats and tropical oils. So things like our coconut oil. Now, saturated fats are stable at room temperature. They don't go easily rancid, and this is really important. We'll come back to that. And as I mentioned, are found mostly in animal fats and tropical oils. Now, our body can produce these kinds of fats from carbohydrates. And once again, this is another reason that we need to be having the right amounts of fats, because if we don't have them, we don't have that saturated fat, our body will produce it and is more likely to be a much more toxic form for the body. So when we're actually looking closer at, rancidity of your fats, it's important to understand that this can happen easily for some of these fats. And you'll be able to tell. So coconut oil is a great example. It should have a fresh smell to it. Now, if you have coconut oil that's expired and it's kind of been sitting in your cupboard, or it's been left out with the lid off for quite some time, it will have that rancid smell to it. And this is what we want to avoid, because as soon as an oil does go rancid, it is going to create more oxidative damage and stress within the body. Okay, so next we've got monounsaturated fats. So these are relatively stable at room temperature. Relatively stable and generally liquid at room temperature. And oleic acid is the most common monounsaturated fatty acid, and is found in things like olive oil, almonds, pecans, avocados, and peanuts. So these are the oils that we generally should not cook with. Because they can go rancid and they can oxidize a lot easier. The saturated fats are less likely to do this, so these are the good ones to be able to cook with. So a good quality coconut oil and that kind of thing. Okay, so as I mentioned, things like your olive oil, almond oil, and your nuts and seeds as well. These are better used as a dressing. So olive oil on top of salads and all that kind of stuff. There are some studies being done about olive oil and how it is actually safe to cook with, but I haven't looked into these studies enough here. We've then got polyunsaturated fats. So these are essential fatty acids that our body cannot produce. So this is where we're looking at things such as our omega-3s and our omega-6s. And we must obtain these through our diet, because if we do not, then we will be deficient. These are also really important at doing things like controlling and reducing inflammation and supporting brain function and development as well. And they are liquid, usually even when refrigerated. So a good example of that is if you've got a fish oil liquid, it should be stored in the fridge, because otherwise it will go off or rancid, so to speak, very easily. And it is still a liquid consistency when it's in the fridge. Whereas if you put something like an olive oil in the fridge or coconut oil, it's going to go hard. And so that's what that's talking about there. Then we've got the worst type of fat that we can put in our body. And this is a hydrogenated fat. Now, essentially what hydrogenation is it's a process that turns a polyunsaturated fat, which should be liquid, into a solid fat. So this is usually done using the cheapest oils, so things like peanut oil, sunflower oil, or soy. And a good example of this is margarine. So margarine is usually made from sunflower oil or sunflower seeds. Sometimes it can be different types of oil as well. I know that they're now making it with olive oil and things too. And basically what happens here is they're putting it through this process of hydrogenation, which is turning it into a solid form, which nature is basically not intended for. So this means it's no longer a whole food. It's no longer what it should be. It's no longer what it used to be. And this is therefore going to create a lot of damage within the body, and these should be avoided at all costs. A lot of the time, these hydrogenated fats and oils are also used in a lot of processed foods. So we really want to do everything we can to avoid those. Now, if we have a bit of a closer look at superfoods and what a superfood is, a superfood is essentially something, it's a type of food that is going to assist our body to function optimally. This could mean that it's going to enhance and assist digestion and therefore absorption of nutrients from our foods. And this is really important because we know that age-old saying, you are what you eat. But we take that one step further and we say, you are what you eat, digest, absorb, and utilize. And yet in clinic, I am to see a patient who already has an optimally functioning digestive system. There are so many things that affect digestion, and it's very rare that we do have optimal digestion happening anymore, which then means that we're going to have a reduction in terms of the nutrients we're absorbing from our food and can end up in deficiency states. A superfood could also be something that supports gut health or stimulates and assists with detoxification. It could be something that supports the health of our immune system or mental health, so looking at our nervous system and the production of neurotransmitters. Superfoods are going to be extremely dense in nutrients. Now, if we have a bit of a closer look with superfoods and gut health, this is where we need to take it back a step, and we need to understand, like I was saying before, that all good health starts in the gut. We are what we eat, digest, absorb, and utilize. So there are a lot of things that actually take place within our digestive system. The first thing is that we're obviously going to be digesting our food here. So we're looking more specifically, we do digest our food from the moment or prior to actually putting any food to our mouth. Digestion's already begun. But where most of the digestion will take place is in the stomach a little bit when we've got the acid, but then once it passes through into the small intestine, we're still digesting food here. We're digesting food to a degree where we can then absorb the nutrients through in that small intestine. We're also going to be eliminating toxins. So the bile that also assists in the digestion of your foods, and more specifically your fats, also contains quite a lot of a toxic load that needs to be taken out of the body. And so this also is going to take place in the digestive system. This is also where majority of the bacteria within our body will live. And this, we are more specifically looking at the large intestine or the colon here. Now, an interesting thing to note, an interesting fact, is that we're actually 1 human cell to 10 bacterial cells. And what that means is that we are mostly made up of bacteria and we're just a little bit human. So it's really important that we get the balance of the bacteria in our gut right as well, because the bacteria in our gut can dictate and determine so many different things within our body as well, from our mental health to our hormones to our skin and so on and so forth. A lot of the neurons and our nervous system is within our gut as well. So we're looking at 500 million neurons, which is a huge amount. And it's also where we're going to produce 95% of our serotonin, dopamine, and GABA, which we'll talk more about soon. And this is where 80% of our immune system is going to be. But this is why if we see a patient, for example, and they have really poor immune health and are always getting sick, or we're having issues with the immune system, one of the things we're going to look into and investigate is gut health. So whole foods help to heal leaky gut. Now, leaky gut is something that takes place generally in the small intestine, and we do find that this is extremely common in clinic as well. So what should be happening, you'll see this photo or this picture diagram on the screen. The left half of this, where we've got these tight junction gut cells, is what we want the gut or the small intestine to look like. You can see above that in the wide that we've got things like toxins, microorganisms, gluten, so on and so forth, that are all in the small intestine but are not able to penetrate through or absorb through into the bloodstream down the bottom. So that little red tube is the bloodstream. And that's how we want it. We should be able to release these acids and enzymes through those little hair or comb-like structures and then absorb nutrients into the blood, and not allowing for things like toxins, microorganisms, so on and so forth to penetrate into the blood. As soon as we start to see a case of leaky gut and inflammation, these tight junction gut cells start to become damaged and they start to pull apart a little bit, leaving what are called leaky junctions. So what this means, and you can see on the diagram, is that foods can actually now get through into the bloodstream, and pathogens and toxins, microorganisms, you name it, all have direct access to get through into that bloodstream, which we don't want. Because this then can create a chronic systemic inflammation to take place and an immune system activation, which can then lead to things like more food intolerances, sensitivities, all of that kind of thing as well. And eventually it can actually lead to things like autoimmune conditions, because the immune system is constantly on and there's a state of constant inflammation. So there's a lot of different things that correlate to and cause leaky gut. And this is where we're going to be looking at a lot of the stuff that we already know. So things like stress. Stress has a direct correlation to causing any kind of leaky gut or damage. We're also looking at specifically our diet and what foods we're eating. And this is where it becomes really relevant for what we're talking about here. So if we're eating whole foods, it should generally be supporting the health of the health and the lining of our small intestine, and preventing and healing any kind of leaky gut that's there. But when we're eating foods that we know are more highly inflammatory or processed, it is going to cause this damage in the gut, and therefore just this cascade that continues to happen, and this vicious cycle. So more inflammation, more immune dysfunction, more leaky gut. It just continues in a cycle. So there are a lot of other things that can also correlate to leaky gut as well. We can be looking at different types of medications, alcohol, even certain types of pathogens and things can cause this as well. Now, if we take a bit of a closer look at whole foods and our mood, our neurotransmitters, as we talked about, up to 95% of them are actually produced in the gut. And as a naturopath, things that we want to look at if we see any kind of issues with anxiety or mental health, motivation, ADD, ADHD, depression, insomnia, we're going to understand that down the bottom on the screen, these neurotransmitters may be deficient. We're going to be looking at things like our GABA on the left, which is a neurotransmitter that's extremely important for relaxation. So to feel cool, calm, and collected. How good does that sound? We could see issues with our dopamine, which is a feel-good hormone that's all about feeling motivated, like you're ready to take on the world, everything's great. So like this little picture, like you've just ran a marathon and won. And we've then got our serotonin on the right, which is a little smiley face, which is our feel-good hormone that also converts to melatonin, our sleep-enhancing hormone. So what we understand here is that we need to produce these neurotransmitters. And if we're not doing that and are having issues in any of this area, we want to look further up the chain and see what it is that's out of balance here. And at the top of the chain, that's where we've got our protein. So as we talked about earlier, protein is our meat, our dairy, our legumes, our nuts, grains, and seeds. And protein will then convert or be broken into what are called amino acids. So as we talked about before, amino acids are the building blocks for everything, and more specifically here looking at neurotransmitters. Now, we need nutrients zinc, B1 and B6 to even be able to break those proteins down into amino acids in the first place. So this is also where we want to make sure that we have adequate amounts of those nutrients in our body as well. And it's quite common for us to see in clinic that we have some deficiencies that are taking place here. There are even certain conditions which will essentially steal your zinc and your B vitamins and render you in a deficiency state as well. So your neurotransmitters will then, your amino acids will then build up to become neurotransmitters with the help of different nutrients along the way. So once again, we want to ensure that all of these nutrients that are involved in these processes are optimal as well. A lot of these we will be getting in our whole foods as well. So as I mentioned earlier, all of your colorful fruits and veggies is where we're going to be getting an abundance of these nutrients through the diet. Okay, so let's have a look at some everyday hero superfoods. The first one is apple cider vinegar. This is something that most of our naturopaths do in the clinic most days. And the reason being is that it's so amazing for digestion. And remember, you are what you digest, absorb, and utilize. It's really important to understand that if you do not have your digestive system producing the right amounts of acids and breaking your food down properly, then you can have the most incredible diet in the world with all of these amazing foods. But if you aren't able to digest them properly, you therefore are not able to absorb the nutrients from them properly as well. So apple cider vinegar, being an acid, improves the stomach hydrochloric acid, which is therefore going to stimulate digestion. It's high in acetic acid and also contains a certain antioxidant, which is really protective for your LDL type of cholesterol. The way that we want to have apple cider vinegar is adding 1 teaspoon to a tablespoon, and I'd suggest that if you haven't done this before, to start with a teaspoon and mix that just into a glass of room temperature water and drink that as soon as you wake up in the morning. So this should be half an hour before breakfast, because we should not be drinking any liquids when we're eating food, because it will actually have the opposite effect and decrease these acids that we're trying to build to digest our foods in the first place. So it should be half an hour either side that we're drinking any kind of liquid. Dandelion root. Now, dandelion root, you can actually buy it in the supermarket these days. You do need to make sure that you're buying the right one and that it is not full of sugar. And you get this as a tea. So it's usually a dandelion and chicory root blend, and it's usually in the health food aisle. So dandelion root is a herb that we actually use quite a lot in clinic. It's very bitter in taste, so it kind of has a bit more of an earthy type of taste, similar to coffee, but a little bit more earthy. It's anything that's bitter as well is really fantastic to stimulate that digestive process, as it's stimulating the vagus nerve within the body. So all of your bitter foods, so things like rocket, really good quality dark chocolate, radishes, grapefruit, all that kind of stuff is great to assist with that digestive process. Dandelion root's also really great as a detoxification herb. So specifically looking at liver detoxification here. It also has mild laxative effects, which will further help it to be to assist with detoxification, to get all the toxic load out of the body, but also assisting if we are feeling, like we've overindulged perhaps and we need a little bit more of a helping hand. This can be a really great tea to be drinking. So as I mentioned, bitter foods stimulate digestion by stimulating the vagus nerve, and dandelion root can also assist in bowel function. The way that you want to drink this is by brewing a cup of strong dandelion root tea. So if you do buy it in a loose herb, just around a teaspoon per cup. Otherwise, you can also buy it in the tea bags. Same thing here, because it's bitter, we should be drinking half an hour before meals to stimulate digestion, but you can just drink it for fun if you want to, or to assist with bowel function if you have overindulged. So I'd probably drink, 3-4 cups a day if we're finding that our bowels are a little bit sluggish. Okay, then we're looking at our green leafy vegetables. Now, this is not news to anybody. We all know that our green leafies are extremely nutrient dense, and to take that a step further, we're going to say they're a superfood. So anything that's green basically means it's going to contain what's called chlorophyll. That's what the green pigment is. And this is going to stimulate liver detoxification, so great for liver health. They're going to be extremely nutrient dense as well, so really high in iron, B12 and folate. There's so many different ways you can use your green leafy veggies. You can actually just chop them and make a salad. For those more harsh type greens like your kales and chards, you can actually massage them a little bit with some oil just to soften them and make it a little bit easier to digest as well. You can also add them to smoothies, or you could steam them if you wanted to. Brussels sprouts. These are a funny one. We usually either love them or hate them. And Brussels sprouts are really fantastic. So the first thing that I want to point out is that when you steam Brussels sprouts, you will notice that they are a little bit, have a bit of an oily residue on the outside. And the reason for this is because it's actually a great plant source of omega-3. It is an inactive form, but it still does have that amazing oil in there, which is really incredible. Brussels sprouts also have some really great cancer protective phytonutrients in there and a decent amount of fiber. Remember, we talked about the importance of fiber earlier and how it binds to the bile acids, can actually help to lower cholesterol and also assist in detoxification for that reason as well. Now, these guys are rich in vitamin K, C, and folate, and the best way to eat them is to steam them up and add some ghee or butter with a little bit of good quality salt and add to salads or as a side dish. You can even get some good quality bacon and kind of fry them up with this or bake them in the oven as well. It's quite yummy. Alrighty, we won't take a break. Our next everyday superfood is Hawaiian sweet potatoes. So you can get these sometimes from your supermarket. Otherwise, your local farmer's market, you might be able to find them as well. And they're usually white on the outside. And when you peel them, they have this beautiful purple pigment, bright purple pigment on the inside. So Hawaiian sweet potatoes are probably the best of the sweet potato class. They do have the least amount of starch and sugar, which is going to be really important to reduce the amount of sugars and starches we're having. They're also really high in anthocyanins, and these are an antioxidant that gives it that amazing purple pigment. They do contain 150% more antioxidants than blueberries, which is pretty amazing. They're also high in vitamin A, C, manganese, copper, B6, potassium, and iron. And as we mentioned, they're a lot lower than your golden, red, and white sweet potatoes. Now, you can eat these just like any other sweet potato because they are lower in starches and sugars. When you do cook them, they can go a little bit barky, in which case I would suggest to just add a little bit more oil if you're going to just roast them. You can steam them and make mash out of them if you want, or even throw some besan flour on top with a decent amount of oil. So besan flour is chickpea flour, and bake them, and they're quite yummy. Then we've got beetroot. So beetroot and its leaves are totally underrated. Beetroot is really high in nitric oxide, which is essentially going to assist with oxygenation around the body and therefore also supporting cardiovascular health. It's also a really great anti-inflammatory and high in iron, folate, manganese, and potassium. Same thing, there are so many things you can do with beetroots. I would actually suggest going and getting these from your local farmers markets with the leaves on them, because you can then use the leaves in salads, and they do have a very earthy taste, but really good for digestion and dense in nutrients. And then you can use the actual beetroot as well. So you can grate that up raw and add it to salads. You can steam it, you can bake it, you can kind of do whatever you want with beetroot. Then we've got blueberries. So blueberries, same thing, really high in these anthocyanins, which are going to give that purple pigment, going to improve capillary integrity and enhance the effects of vitamin C. The antioxidant power of blueberries has been shown to be particularly useful in stabilizing brain function and protecting the neural tissue from oxidative stress, which is pretty amazing as well. Same thing with blueberries, so many ways that you can have them. They're basically nature's lollies, so you can just eat them fresh after you've washed them, add them to smoothies or granola or a little bit of yogurt if you'd like to. You can even make these into a jelly as well, which will really support gut health with a good quality gelatin, and you shouldn't really need any sugar to go in there either. Now, spices. This is one we all know about, and we actually use quite a lot of these in clinic as well. So the main three that we're going to talk about today is garlic, ginger, and turmeric. When can we ever have enough garlic? It's really amazing just to eat lots and lots and lots of this stuff. It has some really incredible antibacterial and antifungal properties, meaning it can help to keep your gut health in check, and also really help if you are suffering with a bit of a cold or something. So you can, really increase your garlic intake. Maybe put some in a bone broth to just take that load off your digestive tract, and it tastes really yummy too. Also really good at supporting cardiovascular health. Ginger, on the other hand, is really great for supporting circulation and oxygenation in the body, and can also be a really great warming and digestive tonic too. So I use a lot of ginger when I treat my patients for digestive issues in clinic, which is most of my patients. And it's really amazing just to soothe that whole digestive tract too and add that warmth. Then we've got turmeric. So turmeric is a bit of a fad, but it is rightfully so. It's pretty amazing root. This stuff has the ability to switch on our body's own antioxidant systems. So we talk a lot about, how all of these amazing purple foods like your Hawaiian sweet potato and your blueberries and even acai, how they're really high in antioxidants. But turmeric actually can switch on our body's own system to produce our own antioxidants, which is just next level amazing. Turmeric is also, as we all know, an incredible anti-inflammatory, and some recent studies also suggest that it's fantastic to support mental health, even things like depression and anxiety, and support liver health as well. So detoxification, foods and drinks. Now, detoxification is something that takes place in different areas in our body. Our skin being the largest organ of our body, we're going to sweat out quite a lot of toxins here. Our liver, we're going to, out through the bile, we're going to be detoxifying a lot of those different hormones and compounds, which will be bound to fiber and taken out through the bowels. And also through going to the toilet and urinating, we're going to be getting rid of quite a lot of toxins as well. So essentially anything that helps with these processes is going to assist with detoxification. So obviously drinking water, and it does need to be filtered, because if you are not filtering your water, your body will be the filter. All of your greens, as we talked about, really high in chlorophyll and a lot of other compounds which can actually assist with detoxification. Celery, so celery juice can be great, just eating celery whole as well. Dandelion root stimulating liver detoxification and also stimulating bowel function, so working in both of those ways. Your cruciferous vegetables, so things like your kale, your broccoli, your cabbages, Brussels sprouts are really fantastic. Bone broth or vegetable broth, really great too. Apple cider vinegar, as we already talked about, and lemon in water in the mornings can work in a similar way to that too. And I'd also add to this anything that is a decent fiber. So obviously a lot of those veggies are going to be decent sources of fiber to take those toxins out through the body. But we could also add in here things like psyllium husk, slippery elm, charcoal can be good in that way in some ways as well. Eating organic is really important too. Now, this is a bit of a controversial topic. There's two main reasons that we want to eat organic food. The first one is that we want to decrease the toxic load going into our body. Just like if we do not filter our water, our body will be the filter. It's the same thing when we're talking about food. Your commercially farmed fruits and veggies are generally going to be heavily sprayed with lots of different pesticides, and we want to avoid that because there are going to be residues of that you're going to be eating and ingesting, which your body then has to detoxify and get rid of. So same thing as that water, we want to try and reduce the toxic load going into our body. The second reason is because majority of the time we're going to be getting a lot more nutrients in organic food because the farming practices are different, and usually the soil components are going to be a lot different and more nutrient dense for those veggies to be able to grow as well. So eating organic and in season is really important. Okay, now foods to support gut health. Now this is where we're talking about that small intestine and how important it is to have those tight junction gut cells so that we're not absorbing more of those toxins into our bloodstream and pathogens and whatnot as well. And also our large intestine, where we want to support the health of our microbiome, so all of those bacteria. So fermented foods are really good to do this. They can also assist with detoxification and digestive processes too. So we're looking at things like our fermented cabbage, which is our sauerkraut, kombucha, which is kind of like a fizzy, kind of vinegary drink that we can have, kefir, kimchi, and yogurt. And then we're looking at our prebiotics. So prebiotics is a food source for your probiotics or your good bacteria. And this is where we're looking at foods that are high in fiber, which will also support detoxification processes in the body. So things like flaxseed, garlic, leeks, artichokes, legumes, and oatmeal can all be a really great prebiotic and assist with detoxification. And then we're looking at gelatin, which is 90% protein, and will also assist in healing up a lot of those tight junctions as well. So we do get a large amount of gelatin as well as other nutrients in bone broths. We can also make gelatin gummies or jellies like I was talking about. You could do that with the blueberries as well. Or straight into a smoothie. It does generally swell a little bit, and you can use collagen instead of gelatin in this way, but definitely ensure that it is a good quality one. Great. Well, I really hope that you have all learned something about foods to incorporate into your diet and how to balance your plate out a little bit as well. If you do have any more questions, please don't hesitate to have a chat with your naturopath or to book in for an assessment or a first treatment consultation. Thanks, guys. Have a great day or a great night from wherever you're listening.